Welcome, everyone, to the Apex Sunday podcast, where John and I discuss Formula One and other motorsports from time to time, as well as features. And if you like this video, please subscribe, like, comment, and share. And John, how are you today?
I'm good. No COVID. So I'm all right.
Right. That's very good. And before we start talking about the São Paulo Grand Prix rather than the Brazilian Grand Prix, it's been relabeled, and I wonder if that's something that Liberty is doing, but it's not very important. We talked earlier a little bit offline about social media and the Max and Hamilton fans. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've got a whiny dog over here. I'm sorry about that.
Well, it kind of mirrors what's happening on social media, doesn't it?
It really does. It was interesting. I posted something on one of the sites that I'm on. Mm-hmm. And I said something about just this Max and Lewis thing, and it's the car, it's not the driver, right. And just got totally torn to shreds because now it seems that most people are not fans of GP, or it seems a lot of people aren't fans of GP, but they're more fans of driver and a personality, sort of a Britney Spears kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I could say, you've heard of Valentino Rossi, of course. Right,
of course,
MotoGP, and he just retired. This is his last season, and yeah, there are some people saying, "Well, I'm done with MotoGP now. Rossi's not there." I don't understand that. I'm a fan. We talked about this last time of the sport of both Formula One and MotoGP. I do like certain drivers and riders for sure, but they come and go. Teams come and go. The sport lasts unless it collapses, right?
And we've got Marquez now, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And it's been the same thing in Formula One. Look at all the dominance in my lifetime. In my lifetime, there have been a ton of very dominant racers. Right. Schumacher, Senna, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess, do we lose fans because they're no longer a fan of a driver who's retired? Possibly. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's maybe social media, the people who complain the most have the loudest voices as well, right? So
absolutely,
there's probably a lot of drivers fans that'll still watch the sport. So, all right, let's move on to sprint qualifying. Sprint qualifying, I notice one thing that I'm going to point out is they went to Ted Kravitz a lot, but we didn't hear anything. And this is sort of what we've seen with the F1 TV channel coverage. But, it was kind of nice to not hear Ted failing to complete sentences and failing to stay focused. So that was kind of nice.
Yes. On that note, there was a lot, I noticed a lot in the race coverage that he was just repeating what other people said.
Oh, was he?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And then we had the interesting thing that Stroll has never been out of Q1 in Brazil. So maybe this is a circuit that he just doesn't like. That was interesting. Bottas failed to qualify Max. I thought that was important, but the results of the sprint race, it wasn't that important. And Brazilians seem to really love Lewis. Is that because he's always talked about Senna or what? What do you think?
He's the king of a fan base, isn't he? Everywhere he goes, he stands in front of everybody. He goes and makes sure after the race he climbs the fence and waves to everybody, and carried the Brazilian flag. I mean, if you carry the Brazilian flag, think about it.
And if we go back to these two guys, and all the fanfare, and in MotoGP they have stands dedicated to each rider if the rider's popular enough, and so the riders always go up to their stands and communicate with their fans and so forth. So Lewis has that kind of touch to him, doesn't he, compared to most others?
Big time. And he's an easy guy to put into that category of love, hate, and nowhere in between. Oh my God. And are we seeing back to the social media? We're seeing that on social media where, they've got all kinds of nasty kindergarten names for him.
Right. And so we saw Lewis get up to, was it 6th or 5th in the sprint?
Yeah.
And Ferrari, as a result, is saying, well, no debate now, reverse grids. And I'm thinking, no, because it was the circuit mostly. And there's also the existence of DRS. That's a huge factor, I think, in this circuit. So I'm not a fan of reverse grids just for the show. And I think it also, before you say something, it doesn't really say to me that Ferrari is very faithful in the new rules will actually make the racing better by making that kind of statement. But at the same time, they're just probably not thinking their statement through, because taking one example and saying that's the end of the debate is not remotely scientific at all. So, it just seemed like a nonsense statement to me.
I think it'd be interesting to try. Why not? I mean, we've got the sprint. I love the sprint race, by the way. Mm-hmm. And as we've seen, we'll rate it later, but I'm looking at it and thinking, we had one brilliant one. We had one that was just a complete flop in my mind, and then we had another brilliant one. Right. It has great capability. I think that back to the reverse grid, we watched a masterclass by Lewis.
Yes.
The patience that he had. I went back and watched the race through his camera.
Right.
Just to see how he did it, his onboard.
Yep.
And it takes a lot of patience and a lot of thought. And that only comes with experience. And oh my God, did he ever do a brilliant job? You know, when he needed to do it, he did it. He needed to recalculate his driving style so he could find places to pass. I mean, wow, like that was just brilliant. And that comes back down to the penalty.
Well, I guess we're just moving on to the sprint race itself rather than the qualifying. It's very confusing. That's fine. Yeah, let's talk about the penalty then. What was it for? It was for the rear wing, correct? The little infringement there.
Right.
And
2 millimeters.
Yeah, and I don't really care about that it was off and that he got the penalty. I think it happens. I thought it was a little bit strange that Mercedes couldn't inspect their own wing and say something and so forth. But it did cause a lot of controversy right off the bat, which I thought was a little bit odd because these infringements don't happen all the time, but they do happen from time to time. And, to me, it was not a big deal other than it shoved Lewis to the back of the sprint race.
I don't think the penalty was untoward. I don't have a problem with that penalty. I think it's too bad.
Yes.
Because it is ridiculous. He would have had no gain whatsoever at all, if anything, other than maybe even an inconsistency in how the car handled.
Right.
But because it was only on one side. 0.2 millimeter, that's the thickness of a business card.
Yeah.
there would be no gain.
And that's why maybe they should have been able to inspect it, because I've seen videos where small parts are damaged and they're allowed to fix them, with the FIA's approval. So that was odd to me that they couldn't inspect it. But, we'll need some more time. I mean, we delayed talking to this race because we wanted to see the result of Mercedes' appeal for the race itself and the incident. So we'll get on to that. But, Lewis, it was entertaining. The sprint race is entertaining seeing Lewis go through the field for sure.
Very much so. Very much so.
And Latifi held over Russell for change, which we've seen some improvements from him. And I noticed the wreaths at the end of the sprint race where they sort of put them on and took them off very quickly. Yes. It just, I don't know. Why are they bothering to do that? It's, tradition, but I don't know. They put them on and take a picture and then throw them out.
They're really clear. They're really clear that this is not a race. The sprint is not a race. And therefore it shouldn't even have a podium. You know what? It's two races.
It is a race. Yeah. Yeah. And I thought that they could change that wreath thing, and when they come back to Canada, if they have a sprint race there, where they could take a cue from the Trailer Park Boys, and instead of a wreath, have the mistletoe belt buckle. But anyways, that was kind of amusing. But Valtteri won the sprint race. He did very, very well. So it was interesting. So should we move on to the race itself?
Absolutely.
All right, so about the race itself, we'll talk about the turn 4 incident when it comes to that, but I will note that Lando had an incident with Sainz at the very beginning, and no complaints, no, oh my God, that guy did this or that, or, you know, all that kind of thing. So that was nice. I mean, Lando took responsibility. He just made a slight misjudgment that happens and went on to finish well. I mean, the safety car helped, obviously. We had Yuki was a bit sloppy this race, obviously, running into Stroll. Bottas made a really good VSC stop, so he got ahead of Perez. And, you know, I guess the tail of the race is basically turn 4 and, you know, Lewis coming through the field from 10th or 11th, was it? So to eventually pass Max. What was your... Do you have anything to say before we talk about the incident?
Brilliant racing once again by Lewis. You know, just spectacular. You know, once again showing great wisdom, showing great patience, showing great aggression when he needed to show aggression. Bottas, what a great race on his part. You know, he had a great start, took it out front, and drove a very mature race. He wasn't going for fastest lap, was just staying out there, which was amazing.
And he had to let Lewis by, which is totally understandable. So
totally understandable. You know.
But my take on the incident, and I've seen the Driver 61 video and Jolyon Palmer's video, they think Max deserved a penalty. And this comes back to Austria, but there's a massive difference. Like, we both thought the Austrian penalties were absolutely ridiculous. If you're on the outside, you're going to be pushed off. But when they were pushed off in Austria, the inside driver stayed on the track, or at least 2 tires on the track. Max was way, way out.
Yeah.
So to me, he was never going. He basically never made the corner, and he went wide. And people say gained advantage. I didn't really bother analyzing that part, but eventually Lewis got by him a few laps later. And going back to what you just said, to me, this proves, or that it solidified, that Lewis is a far better racer than Max is currently. His racecraft is way better. Max is very, very fast, but his racing head-to-head has never been great. And this is just another example of it. And I think back to Baku with Ricciardo. You know, Red Bull loved Max to death, so it was both their faults, but that was Max's fault in my mind. And this is just another example of his inability to race well with his competitors. If I was on the racetrack, I'd be confident that Lewis wouldn't do something to put me off most of the time. I mean, incidents always happen to a degree that, you know, you're on the edge, right? But Max, I would not trust whatsoever. And Red Bull is doing nothing to help him become a better racer.
No, I agree with you fully. And one of my race mentors said, you know, there's always at least one weapon on the track. Sometimes there's 2, but there's always one weapon on the track, and you need to give that person room. If you look at Verstappen's history and how he started, he was pure weapon. You wouldn't want to go into a corner with Matt. But in specifically looking at this corner 4 incident, it's my take that it's blatantly obvious that he pushed him off the track on purpose, doing anything that he can do to win. We're playing with lives here at great rates of speed. The rules state you have to give the other driver room. They don't say anything about contact. They say you have to give the other driver room. Was it Lewis's corner going in? I think he had enough that it was enough gain that it would have been his corner. And Max knew that, and so he pushed him off. Is that penalty situation? Look, I'm not a huge Max fan. I'm not a huge Lewis fan. But if I was the steward of that race, I would definitely be tossing a penalty Max's way. That was just wrong.
it's sort of an example, like go back to Austria, there shouldn't have been penalties, and this one there should have been. So yeah, they're making a mess. The current F1 regime that does all this kind of stuff, it's been a mess this whole year, basically. So
they changed it up.
On.
They changed it up a number of years ago, where they threw in an old driver in the room, so they could say, you know what?
Yeah,
that was racing.
Yes,
this is a good thing, but at the same time, I think we need to take it a step back from that and say, here are the rules. We need consistency. We need the same group of people that are going to apply the rules at every race. Because it wasn't just that with Max. Max did a little bit of weaving as well. Yeah. And that is even more dangerous than what he did to Lewis in corner 4.
And he got the black and white flag, and you said whatever or something to that.
And he said, say hi, right?
Right.
Tell him I say hi. Like, whoa.
Yeah, and it reminded me of Schumacher, basically, Michael. We both watched that documentary, and that incident with Coulthard at Spa, and David talks about how Michael just couldn't conceive that he had a part in that incident, and it wasn't just all David. And this is the model that Max is following and Red Bull is encouraging, as far as I'm concerned.
But at least Schumacher and Senna, to a certain degree, did it with some aplomb, and they did it and coming out saying, "What? No, I wasn't doing that."
Right.
And at least they did it with a little bit of intelligence. Max is just a weapon,
right?
And how he's managing to pull this off without getting penalties has me just baffled.
Well, I've also seen Leclerc made a statement today that they're watching. Well, basically, because the appeal was denied from Mercedes, Leclerc has said that, okay, that's the new rule. So now I know how to adjust the way I drive and race. So I have no confidence that that's going to be the case, because I think the next time that someone else drives someone off the course, there may be a penalty.
I hope there is.
Is it just because Max and Lewis are in the championship? Is that the political pressure to do this?
Oh man, I don't know. Like, it's just beyond me how a driver can do what Max did, and two blatant horrible incidents and get away with it scot-free.
Yeah.
And again, like you say, Leclerc, it's not just Leclerc, it's Yuki, it's all the rest of the drivers, the young drivers who look at it and go, oh, we can do that then.
Yeah.
Oh, no. I mean, this is what costs lives.
Mm-hmm. So, with all that said, how would you rate the race?
Rating the race is probably an 8 for me. I really enjoyed it. It was great watching Lewis. It was great watching Max. It was Perez. There were a whole bunch of great drives in that race, I think.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 7, so very close to yours. Penalty, that incident soured a lot of it for me, but still 7's pretty good. What about driver of the race for you?
Oh, it's Lewis.
Yeah, me too. I mean, that's obvious.
It's a given.
Again, back to his racecraft and the way he saw that what Max was going to do after he'd done it, and then he set him up perfectly for the pass that he made afterwards. So
now, if we were to wipe him out, because it's sort of a no-brainer that it was Lewis's race, is there anybody else that sort of stuck out in your mind?
Not really. What about you?
Well, again, Gasly.
Yeah, that's true. He finished
Gasly
7th.
Yeah, and drove a great race.
The Alpines got up there too.
The only other thing that we didn't talk about was the power of the undercut, which makes it even more impressive, Lewis doing what he did, I think.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to news then. So for news, we have Antonio Giovinazzi losing his seat to Guan Yu Zhou. He'll partner him at Alfa Romeo. And again, he is a race winner in F2. He's second in the championship. But back to social media, the loudest voices are like, oh, he's a pay driver, all this kind of stuff. And sure, he does bring some sponsorship. And obviously the Chinese market, and this goes back to the social media, Max followers, Lewis followers. Now there's going to be Guan Yu followers. And is that the case? Like, there are Canadians in F1 currently, but through much of when I've been watching it, there hasn't been, other than Jacques and during his time. So is that just a thing that you need? I guess the Americans want an American driver for that to increase the viewership. I guess that works. I mean, I've just never thought that way. So that's always a bit unusual reason for me. It's like, well, Chinese driver, the Chinese market will take off. And I think in the news, China is now rated above the States as the richest country in the world. So obviously there's a lot of money to be made by marketing to China.
You know what? It's a different world. It's a different world. If you look at pay drivers,
yeah,
all the first drivers were paid drivers. They're all billionaire or
princes or royalty, right?
I guess that it would have been millionaire. You know, the first GP in 1906. Right. It was nothing but the uber wealthy. Yes. We scroll forward to the dawn of our current Formula One, or just before it. It altered to talent, and yes, there were some paid drivers, and the pendulum has swung back. If we look at the 1960s, there were people like Peter Revson, as an example of Revlon fame, who McLaren stuck in a car,
right?
And he was a capable driver, but he was just a capable driver. He wasn't going to win a championship, but he brought just a ton of money.
As did Niki Lauda at certain points in his F1 career as well, right? Right. And Lauda was a great driver.
But then again, there were people like Bruce McLaren and Graham Hill and Jim Clark. I could go on. There were a whole whack of them that came from incredibly humble beginnings that did very well. Now it looks like we're going back the other route.
Yes.
That said, back then, it didn't cost millions of dollars to get you just to be a candidate for Formula One. And now if you even want to be a candidate, how much does it cost to campaign Formula 2, Formula 3? We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Yes, the rich man's sport.
It is, and it pretty much always has been, but now more than ever, I think, because again, we've got Latifi, Stroll, and Mazepin, billionaire fathers, right?
Norris is,
is he? Oh yeah, yes. I didn't know that. Okay, so for me, we'll see how Guan Yu does. Give him a chance. I think he's earned enough to be. He's got a super license. He's won some races in F2. Consistency does come too late to some than others, so we'll see how it goes. What do you think overall?
I would have liked Ilott.
Yep, that's true.
Instead of Zoo, but you know what? 6.5 dozen, and he's bringing money. I think you've got to have that these days. So Yahoo! I can't wait for another new face.
Right, and I have nothing else in news. What about you? No. Okay, so next up we have a new circuit, the Losail International Circuit, a motorcycle circuit basically. So it's got one long straight and then a lot of long, very fast corners. So it's going to be a very physical race. And I have a feeling that passing is going to be very difficult, but we'll see.
Well, maybe at the end of the straight, right?
Yes.
You know, with DRS. Now, what's the twisty bits? I guess if they're twisty bits, it's going to, if they're super high speed, it's going to favor Red Bull. And if they're high speed, it's going to favor Mercedes.
Yeah, it's well, yeah, I think those two will do very well, and we'll see how it goes. So I noticed that the start time is at 5 o'clock local time there, and in MotoGP it's at 8. So it's a twilight race for F1, but I think it's a good decision because the riders in MotoGP have said we move it to 7 because yes, it's in the desert, but at night it gets very, very cold in the circuit. It got so dangerous that the circuit got so cold that almost all of them were falling off their bikes. So the 5 o'clock start time for F1 should avoid any massive temperature changes. So we'll see, but that could be a factor. We'll have to see how it goes.
I also have to add that this is a renaissance year. This is having been a fan for over 50 years of Formula One.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a championship going on through the whole year. And when was the last time we had that?
Yeah.
And when will we have it next?
Hard to say.
Right. So
it is. Yeah.
So I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah, it's, well, for the most part, me too. I just hope that the next few races are clean and that things are the title's determined not in the way that we saw with Senna, Prost, and Schumacher and Villeneuve.
Yes.
I'd rather not see that again. So,
or with penalties.
Yeah, or with ridiculous penalties. Appropriate penalties, you got to pay the price, but ridiculous ones, not so. All right, John. So we'll talk about the next race, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Rob.
And remember to, if you like this video, to share, comment, like, and
subscribe.
And subscribe. Bye-bye.